Joining us now for analysis on this story and how Thursday's debate could influence the outcome of the November election is Cassie Smedile, the Deputy Communications Director at the Republican National Committee. So, Cassie, there's been a lot of developments, of course, since the first debate, including the second debate just not happening at all. So I want to ask you, as far as this Thursday goes, how important is it for President Trump and the rest of the Republican Party down the ballot to have a big night?
Yeah, well, it's important that the American people, first and foremost, get this opportunity to hear from both candidates. Of course, we've heard a lot from President Trump for the last 4 years, and not to say the least of which the last few days. But Joe Biden, we haven't. He's had a media lid this entire week, which means the voters haven't gotten a fair chance to hear directly from him. Certainly, the mainstream media has done nothing to put pressure on him to answer any questions. So it's important that the voters get this opportunity to hear from both candidates on an even playing field to the extent that that's possible now that we're seeing the antics that the debate commission's trying to pull, but at least that they have the opportunity in full, without the filters of the mainstream media, to hear from both of them.
And I don't think it's just Joe Biden who is avoiding answering questions. It's also Kamala Harris. In fact, it was Jonathan Karl of ABC News yesterday who pointed out that Kamala Harris fielded questions from the actors of the Marvel Avengers movie, and he pointed out that she answered more questions from those actors than she has the entire press during the entirety of this campaign. And that's an alarming fact, no matter if you're what side of the political spectrum you're on. I mean, you need to hear from these candidates, and now we're hearing, too, that the debate commission is changing the rules, muting the microphones on Thursday night in order to hear from both candidates. But at the same time, people are saying that's not much of a debate if one of the microphones is muted at that point. Right. Do you think that that is a overt action that favors one of the candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even John Karl calling this out about Kamala Harris not taking questions from her own pool, but taking them from Hollywood actors. Okay, so he tweets it, but why not pressure her to take questions? She walks from her plane to her SUV, and nobody in her pool tries to holler questions at her, certainly not in the way that they do for President Trump. They don't write stories pressuring them to take questions or talking about how they're not leveling with the American people and being honest with the American people about their positions on packing the Supreme Court or raising taxes on more than 80% of Americans. But they don't call them out. And I think that's the hypocrisy here. Same with the debate commission. We're so fair. This is just so people can hear what the candidates have to say. But when in fact, it's to say, no, this is so that Joe Biden yet again gets a pass. Joe Biden yet again gets the rules turned in his favor. But I think the American people see through this. They tried to do this in 2016 in Hillary Clinton's favor. American voters said, no, we know what this looks like because we've been watching this our entire lives. We've been watching the Beltway elites, politicians and media alike, curry to each other's favor instead of currying to the American people and the American voters' favor. And that's where Donald Trump interrupted the whole process. When he won on election night, that was the American people's referendum on this business as usual Washington and media politics. And I think it's what we're going to see again. So despite all of their efforts to cover for the candidates, despite all of their efforts to stack the deck in the Biden-Harris favor, the voters see it for what it is. And I think that's why we're going to have a really good night in just 2 short weeks.
And Cassie, at the first debate, it was Chris Wallace, and we all know exactly how that turned out. The second debate, it was supposed to be Steve Scully, who is now unemployed for how dishonest he was about covering the Trump administration, especially when he said that he was hacked after asking Anthony Scaramucci for advice on how to address President Trump. And now we have the third debate coming up with Kristen Welker, and I am going to give her the benefit of the doubt until she gives me a reason not to, but it's unlikely that she'll bring up the Hunter Biden emails. I mean, that's a story that has swept the nation, but really it's gone untalked about in many mainstream media circles. So do you think that it's up to President Trump to bring that up if he does want to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think President Trump not only should bring it up, he should yield his time to Joe Biden to take all the time he needs to answer it thoroughly, thoughtfully, whatever he needs. And I think we also have to talk about this in the bigger context of what's happening here. This is the Biden corruption. This is the Washington Beltway corruption, just what I was talking about with the media covering for their own, for the establishment elites. 47 years of camaraderie between the media and Joe Biden, and they've covered for him. And so I think President Trump needs to call that out as well. Then we also need to talk about this next horizon, this next frontier of censorship through social media, which is a big part of the story as well with Hunter Biden, that they just took it upon themselves to censor it, not allowing the American people to read it, let alone decipher it for themselves. And that's a big offense to the American voters, because we don't want government intrusion in our lives. Now this next frontier of their cronies in Silicon Valley, that's troubling as well. And so I think all of this plays into the big picture of the things that we just really hate about those who think themselves better or more entitled than us. And Joe Biden is really a hallmark for that Washington elitism, and that the American people, again, push back against in 16, and I think they'll do it again in just 2 weeks.
And it's one of those issues, too, where I feel like every American almost assumes to some degree that a career politician is corrupt in some regard, but it's a different conversation when you actually see the evidence behind it, when you have the email evidence, when you see the transactions, when you see, for example, a 10% of a Chinese company being held for the big guy, that assumingly being Vice Presidential Joe Biden. And it's interesting in the media, too. For example, yesterday the New York Times was telling people to be outraged about the fact that President Trump may have a Chinese bank account, but it's hard to take that seriously when they're not giving any credence to the idea that the vice president was getting a certain amount of just a part of a company in China at 10%. I mean, you can't be upset about one and not the other. And I think a lot of Americans are starting to see through that. But Cassie Smedile, I really appreciate you coming on, breaking down what we can expect on Thursday night. Thank you.
Thank you.